You will be placed into deportation proceedings if your I-751 is denied. And that's especially true during a Trump presidency. So let me explain what actually happens and how it can be prevented and what we can do if you're placed into deportation proceedings. All right, so historically, Trump or no Trump, when your I-751 gets denied, eventually USCIS will issue a notice to appear in immigration court. But the way we prevent them from doing that historically is by immediately refiling a new I-751 with additional evidence that we haven't submitted previously. And sometimes we also need to get divorced before we refile a new I-751 in a different category, because the two main categories are you could file it based on being fully married, where both spouses sign the form, or you could file it based on being fully divorced, where there's a divorce certificate and you submit evidence that your marriage was initially entered into in good faith. So let me give you an example. Around 2 years ago, I had a client come to me during a consultation. I had never met him before, and his I-751 had recently been denied. And I looked it up, and the reason it got denied was because he failed to respond to a request for additional evidence. And he didn't even know that they had issued a request for evidence. He never received it by mail, and he did not have an online USCIS account, so he didn't see that a request for evidence was issued. And he comes to me with his spouse, and he asks me, like, what do I do? And I basically said, well, this got denied like 2 months ago. There's a good chance that the balls are in motion, that the gears are in motion for you to be placed into removal proceedings. But don't worry, if you're placed into removal proceedings, we could always refile a new I-751 with the judge. But the problem is, it's just gonna be much more expensive, because now you're gonna have to hire me to defend you in removal proceedings and to refile a new I-751 and possibly to terminate the removal proceedings or proceed to a full trial on the outcome of your I-751. So something that would have been pretty cheap to deal with might become very expensive if you receive that dreaded notice to appear in immigration court. But if it does happen, we can ultimately salvage the situation and save your permanent residence, because your marriage was entered into in good faith and there is enough evidence available here to prove that. But what we should do now is immediately refile a new I-751, because what happens in practice is that USCIS, before they issue the notice to appear, they check to make sure you're actually removable from the United States. And if you're out of status, they take the position that if your I-751 gets denied, that your immigration status has been terminated. I've made other videos about how this isn't actually true, but USCIS takes the position that your permanent residence is terminated once your I-751 is denied. And before they issue a notice to appear, they check to make sure you're actually deportable. And at that time, if you have a new I-751 already pending, then sometimes they don't issue a notice to appear in immigration court. So 2 years ago, when I met with this client, we immediately refiled a new I-751, and today it's still pending, and he was never referred to immigration court to begin his removal proceedings. And I, at this point, don't expect him to be referred to immigration court. I think that we have a good chance of getting the I-751 approved without having to go to court at all. Let me elaborate a little further on what I said a moment ago. So once your I-751 gets denied, it's USCIS's position that you are no longer a permanent resident, and normally at some point thereafter, they'll issue a notice to appear in immigration court. I think they're gonna be more aggressive about this under a Trump presidency. In fact, that example I just gave, I think had a really high chance of getting referred to immigration court if Trump was president. But to get back to my point, USCIS is incorrect in saying that you are no longer a permanent resident once your I-751 is denied. There's actually only 2 ways that you can lose your permanent residence. Number one is if you voluntarily sign Form I-407 to abandon your permanent residence. This happens oftentimes when you leave the US for more than a year continuously with a green card and you try to come back. The customs officer might say something like, hey, you've been gone, you abandoned your residency, sign this and make it easy on yourself. And by the way, after you sign this, it'll be really easy for you to become a permanent resident again. I strongly discourage people from ever signing Form I-407 until they've actually spoken with an immigration lawyer. If you say, no, I don't want to sign it, they will probably end up giving you a notice to appear in immigration court. And then before you do anything, speak to an immigration lawyer. Don't just sign the form if you don't know what you're doing. The other way that you can lose your immigration status is if an immigration judge orders you removed from the United States. So although USCIS takes the position that you are no longer a permanent resident, you are still a permanent resident with all the rights and benefits of a permanent resident until an immigration judge orders you removed from the United States. So what would happen after USCIS says that you're not a resident is they'll refer your case to enforcement and removal operations, which is a different part of the agency, and they will issue a notice to appear for you to go to court. And then a judge will decide whether or not you can keep your permanent residence or whether you are ordered removed from the United States, or some other option like readjustment where you can become a permanent resident again. And that's beyond the scope of this video. One other point I want to make to just clarify is once you have a notice to appear issued, although you are still a permanent resident, you should not travel internationally. It can be viewed as abandoning any claim to permanent residence and self-deporting if you leave the United States while you are actively in removal proceedings. Don't do it. Talk to an immigration lawyer if you need to travel and you're still a permanent resident, but most lawyers will probably tell you that it's risky and it shouldn't be done. All right, guys, that brings us to the end of the video. Just to summarize, I don't anticipate anything really changing under Trump when an I-751 gets denied, other than you might be placed into removal proceedings more quickly. Even if you end up refiling a new I-751 in a timely fashion, you might end up in removal proceedings. But if that happens, speak with a lawyer. You might still have some good options available. If you guys are new to my channel, my name is Pouyan Darian. I'm an immigration lawyer. I try to put out family-based immigration videos several times a week. So if you're interested in these topics, be sure to subscribe. If you need any assistance with your immigration case, I would love to assist you. Schedule a consultation and I'll talk to you soon.